The 1904 Olympics were held in St. Louis in the USA, and while most Olympic Games have at least a few quirks or oddities, these Olympics were downright insane and were easily the worst Olympic Games of all time. Let's break down some of the reasons why. Strap in because this list is a doozy. Number 8. St. Louis wasn't originally selected as the host city. So the St. Louis Olympics weren't supposed to be in St. Louis. That's a fitting start to the downright lunacy of these games. The International Olympic Committee originally awarded the games to Chicago, but problems arose when it was discovered that St. Louis, just a few hundred miles away, were planning to host a World's Fair at the exact same time that summer. The St. Louis folks had deep pockets and wanted the Olympics too, so in order to force the IOC's hand, they secured a deal with the Amateur Athletic Union to hold the World Track and Field Championships in St. Louis at the same time. And by the way, I'm putting secured a deal in air quotes. You and I both know how they secured that. Anyway, that was obviously no good for the Olympics, so they reluctantly moved the games from Chicago to St. Louis. And while that perhaps seemed logical, the IOC obviously held tremendous resentment towards the St. Louis folks, so much so that the founder of the modern Olympics refused to attend the games. Number 7. The games lasted for almost 5 months. Even casual viewers and fans of the Olympics will know that the games today typically run for around 2 to 3 weeks. It's an in and out, pretty quick event really, considering how many events and athletes are hosted at that time. But oh no, not the St. Louis Games. These Olympics ran for 146 days, or just about 5 months. Curiously, the track and field bits were done in just 4 or 5 days, but the rest of the events were scattered over the rest of the time to align with what was going on with the World's Fair stuff. Can you imagine the Olympics today taking a backseat to anything like that? It's crazy. That said, we shouldn't poke too much fun at St. Louis because the 1908 Games in London, held just 4 years later, they ran even longer if you can believe it, like a full month plus longer. So all told, the London Games lasted more than half a year. Just wild. Number 6. No one showed up. Yeah, you heard that right. It kind of makes sense if you think about it. Back in 1904, even though St. Louis was a fairly large American city at that point, travel conveniences are not what they are today, and the cost to travel was much higher back then. And thus, many athletes and indeed entire nations decided to just not bother making the trip. So it would be an understatement to say that this was not a global international event. It really was the American Olympic Games. Of the 630 total athletes at the Games, 523 were Americans, or roughly 83% of the total athletes were Americans. Only 12 nations were represented at these Games, just 12. Many of the events didn't even feature non-Americans, so not surprisingly, the USA would go on to win 239 medals, which is the largest single haul by one country for any single Olympic Games before or since. But considering that they had 83% of the athletes, I'm surprised they didn't win even more if that's possible. For those wondering, the second highest medal count at a single Olympics by a single country is the USSR at the 1980 Olympics, which again is basically because no one showed up, this time due to the infamous boycott. These records, they should have asterisks next to them. Number 5. US medals were won by non-US athletes. Obviously, as is probably becoming very clear at this point, these Olympics were not without controversy. But one of the quirkier oddities was that some athletes won medals for the United States when they weren't even American citizens. Allow me to explain. If you think of America at the turn of the 20th century, it was a country being flooded with new immigration from all over the world, most especially from various European countries. And it will come as no surprise that some of those immigrants were world-class athletes. So the US said to them, hey, welcome to America. Want to throw on the stars and stripes and win us some medals? And the new immigrants were, of course, like, hell yeah, let's do it. And so that's exactly what happened. So even though they were not US citizens, they competed for the US at the Olympics. This is actually such a contentious issue that as recently as 2012, Norway was still calling for the IOC to award them 2 Olympic gold medals in wrestling that stem from this Olympics at this time. Crazy stuff. We are now halfway through the insanity that is the 1904 St. Louis Olympics, and believe me, it gets so much weirder from here. If you're enjoying this video, I'd love it if you consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It helps out a ton. Thanks in advance. Number 4, the marathon. The 1904 men's marathon at the St. Louis Olympics has become the stuff of legend. I don't have anywhere near enough time to run it all down here, so let's just hit some of the highlights, or lowlights, depending on your point of view. First, the weather. It was over 90 degrees Fahrenheit or 32 degrees Celsius at race time, which is freaking boiling hot if you need to run over 26 miles. And then they decided to run it primarily on dust-covered country roads, which obviously made breathing hard and, running became even more difficult. All told, 18 of the 32 competitors who started the race had to withdraw. They didn't even finish. During the race, the runners were constantly having to dodge crosstown traffic, railroad trains, trolley cars, and delivery wagons who were just on their route going about the place. Of the 26 or so miles of the course, 24 of the miles had no water available on them, which is crazy, but it gets even crazier when we find out that this was done intentionally by the race organizer because he wanted to see what would happen to athletes under purposeful dehydration. WTF. One athlete had a stomach hemorrhage and almost died. Another guy stopped along the race route to eat some wild apples, which led to stomach cramps. Another guy got chased off the course by a pack of wild dogs. The original winner of the race was disqualified after it was discovered that he got a ride in a car for 11 miles of the race. I made none of those things up. The guy who won the race, Thomas Hicks, took almost 3.5 hours to finish, which is basically what half-decent amateurs would run today. But even that has a question mark around it, as he needed raw eggs, brandy, and doses of strychnine to finish the final 10 miles. But other than that, yeah, totally normal race. Number 3, they had some wild events. It's common for the Olympic Games to experiment with new events, either as demonstration events to evaluate it for future games, or to create new iterations of events like with new distances or new formats and things like that. But St. Louis in 1904 took bizarre events to the next level. How about the ever popular plunge for distance? It's exactly what it sounds like. Dive in the water and then just see how far you can go. It's probably the only event ever to actually favor larger individuals. If you don't believe me, just check out the science. It's true. There was also the tug of war as a medal event. Yeah, tug of war. Though if I'm being honest, I kind of wish they would bring this one back. Who wouldn't want to see that? You could also win an Olympic medal for roque, which is an American version of croquet, because sure, why not? This is 1904 in St. Louis. And even if you were in a, quote, normal event, it could be straight up weird too. For example, in addition to the marathon nuttiness we just talked about, the swimming events, they were held in a temporary pond. No pool, a pond. I'm telling you, these games were wild. Number 2, sorry ladies, no games for you. I probably don't need to tell you this, but the role of women in competitive athletics in 1904 wasn't what it is today. I think that falls under the no kidding category. Of the 100 or so events that occurred at the 1904 Olympic Games, women were allowed to compete in one. Just one. And for you trivia aficionados, congrats if you knew it was for archery. 6 women competed in the archery event, but 5 of them were from the same amateur archery club in Cincinnati, Ohio. So women only got one event, and for that one event, it's basically just one group of women from one city in one country. I'm shaking my head. Curiously though, women's boxing was featured as a demonstration sport at the 1904 Olympics. So basically the ladies weren't allowed to do much other than beat the crap out of each other. And it was so successful that women's boxing did not reappear at the Olympics until 2012, just a super short 108 years later. Number 1, the Anthropology Days. You're probably wondering what put these Olympic Games over the top to make them the worst games ever. After all, Berlin in 1936 was a Nazi showcase, and the 1972 Games in Munich featured a real-life massacre. Why aren't those worse? Well, hold your stomachs and let's discuss the Anthropology Days at the 1904 Olympics. At that aforementioned World's Fair held alongside these Olympics, the organizers decided that they were going to create what they called human zoos. These would be stocked with so-called uncivilized tribes of the world for people to gawk at, and that alone is gross. But as a cross-promotion with the Olympics, these people were then paid to participate in Olympic events such as javelin, archery, and long jump, which were deemed in line with their lifestyle. I'm putting that in air quotes. And when they did poorly, because, you know, it's ridiculous, it was used as racist evidence that these people were inferior. For what it's worth, the founder of the modern Olympics was disgusted by this, and it was part of the reason why he didn't attend the games. Remember, we already talked about the whole Chicago-St. Louis thing he didn't like too. He called the Anthropology Days an outrageous charade, but I think he was being nice because I've got a few non-YouTube approved words I could use to describe it myself. Well, there you have it. That's the list today. And now do you see what I mean about these games being the worst ever? I hope I proved my point. Anyways, hope you liked today's video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and we will be talking more soon.